Hi, it's Monday the 11th of July 2022. I'm spending summer walking from Land's End to John O'Groats. Last night I arrived in Motherwell, where I'm spending a couple of nights, and today I've just come into Glasgow. I want to get some hiking bits and bobs for the rest of my walk, and I also like to have a look around George Square and the cathedral and other historical buildings. So George Square is the main focal point of the centre of Glasgow. This is the large square where all the public demonstrations and other public events take place. It was opened in 1787 and it's named after King George III. There's a couple of very magnificent buildings here. I'm just going over to look at the city chambers. This is the City Chambers building, which is the main building in the square. And this was built between 1883 and 1888. And there was a competition for the best design for the building. And it was won by a chap called William Young, who came from Paisley. There's several statues in the square. This one is dedicated to Dr. Thomas Graham, who was an experimental scientist. And at the other corner of the square next to the City Chambers building is this statue of James Oswald, who was a famous Glasgow MP. The main statue in the middle of the square is dedicated to Sir Walter Scott, and he was the novelist who wrote famous books such as Rob Roy and Ivanhoe. And this is Sir Robert Peel, who repealed the Corn Laws. Just going to go for a walk over to Glasgow Cathedral. This is Glasgow Cathedral. This is the oldest cathedral in mainland Scotland and the oldest building in Glasgow. It's called St Mungo's Cathedral after the patron saint of Glasgow, and the first stone cathedral dates back to 1136. So time to look for a hiking and camping shop and then head back to Motherwell. I'm spending the next 3 days walking to Stirling. I think the first day I'm just walking through Greater Glasgow, so it's just going to be a walk through highly urbanised areas. But I think as I get to Stirling that it starts getting more scenic. Tuesday the 12th of July, so I'm spending the next 3 days walking to Stirling. I don't think I'll be doing much filming today because I'm just leaving the Greater Glasgow region this morning, and it's a huge, very built up urban area, so it's just a mundane walk to my next hotel. I'm staying in a hotel this evening just outside Cumbernauld. I've just come out of Coat Bridge. I'm about 5 miles away from Cumbernauld now, and I've left all the urban environment and I'm back in the countryside, which is nice. I think I'm heading towards the hills over in the distance there. I had a look on my map, and those hills on the horizon, those are the Kilsyth Hills. And it's a pity it's a cloudy day, because it would look quite picturesque on a sunny day. I won't be crossing the hills because Cumbernauld is just down at the foot of the hills, just about a mile in that direction. And then tomorrow I'll be travelling east along the Forth and Clyde Canal to a town called Bonnybridge. And then from there the next day I'll be heading north to Stirling, where I'll be spending a couple of days. Just arrived at my hotel, so I've got the big urban region out the way, which I'm quite pleased about, and tomorrow is a pleasant walk along a canal. So until then, good night. Wednesday the 13th of July. This morning I'm heading over to the Forth and Clyde Canal, and I'll be following the canal to Bonnybridge. I'm getting quite close to the canal, but for the first part of my walk this morning I'll be following the route of the Antonine Wall. Now, everybody's heard of the Hadrian's Wall. That was completed in 128 AD, and for a while that was the Roman Empire's northern border with Caledonia, as they called Scotland at the time. And then in 142 AD, the Romans decided to extend the empire further north, and so they decided to build another wall further north of Hadrian's Wall, between the Firth of Clyde and the Firth of Forth. And this was a wall that was about 37 miles long. It was a defensive wall. It was similar to Offa's Dyke that I visited when I was in Wales. So it was a very high defensive earthwork, a big high bank, and in front of it would have been a large ditch. And so they built it. It took several years to build it, but they didn't stay here for very long, and no one knows why. It may have been because there were just far too many attacks by the Caledonians, but after a few years they abandoned the Antonine Wall and they moved back down to Hadrian's Wall. Along the wall, the Romans also built several forts, and I've just arrived at the site of one of the forts. This is the site of Kroy Hill Fort, and this would have been a big square earth bank going around it with stone buildings inside, and they would have built these every so often along the wall. And there's still the remains of some stone walls here, and this would have been the wall, one of the walls of the central headquarters of the fort. So from here I'll just follow the route of the Antonine Wall down to the canal. I've just arrived at the Forth and Clyde Canal, so I'll be following this most of the way to Bonnybridge. The Antonine Wall is quite close on the south bank, so I hope to see parts of it on the way into Bonnybridge. I've just arrived at a site where another Roman fort stood. So this is the site of where the Castle Carey fort stood on the Antonine Wall. And the fort, it was 3.5 acres in size, and it was one of only 2 stone-built forts that was on the Antonine Wall. I'm just going to have a wander around and see if there's any remnants of the walls left. No, unfortunately I can't find any trace of the fort here now, so that's not a problem. I'm going to carry on. There's plenty more to see along this walk. I've just arrived at Seabegs Wood, and there's a part of the Antonine Wall here which is still quite noticeable. You can see where it was built, so I'm just going to go up there now. I'm walking along the wall now. When the Romans built it, the wall would have been 3 meters high and about 4 meters wide, and they would have had a military road here so they could easily travel from one end of the wall to another. And on my right, facing the Caledonian side, there's a huge ditch, so that would have been part of the defences as well. And also on the wall there would have been a big wooden palisade as well for extra defence. So for a few years this would have been the northernmost border of the Roman Empire. The wall was named after Antoninus Pius, and he was the adopted son of Emperor Hadrian, and he was the emperor when the wall was built. So time to continue to Bonnybridge. Just arrived in Bonnybridge. It's just a small town. I'm just going to the supermarket now, and there's a campsite about a mile or so to the south, so I'm just going to get some food and then pop down to the campsite. Just arrived at Bonnybridge Eco Camping and Glamping. It's very Scottish weather today. When I arrived here about half hour ago it was absolutely chucking it down with rain. Now the skies have cleared and there's some absolutely gorgeous views of the mountains, so I'm now going to plan my trip to Stirling tomorrow. So until then, good night. Thursday the 14th of July. So this morning I'm walking to Stirling, and before I get to the city centre there's a place just to the south of the town called Bannockburn which I'd like to visit. And that of course is the place where the famous battle took place on the 23rd and 24th of June 1314. So the events leading up to the Battle of Bannockburn started back in 1296, and that was when Edward I was King of England, and he invaded Scotland and he brought a large occupying English army with him, and over the years they built lots of strongholds, lots of castles around Scotland, and for a while they occupied the country. And then in 1306 Robert the Bruce became the King of Scotland, and he decided that he wanted to push the English out of Scotland. And so he raised a small army, and then he started attacking the English strongholds one by one, and he succeeded in pushing the English out. And then in 1307 Edward I died, and his son Edward II was crowned King of England. Now Edward I was quite a skillful military leader, and he was also a very good politician and diplomat, and that was quite essential in England at the time, because the earls, they were very powerful rich people, and they had their own castles, the private armies and so on, and so the king had to keep them in line, otherwise they would start rebelling against the monarchy. Now Edward II was nothing like that. He's been described as one of England's worst kings. He had no idea about running military campaigns, and he was also a very bad diplomat. There's the infamous story of a close friend of his called Piers Gaveston, and he was a bit too gobby for his own good, and he was always being condescending to the earls and insulting them. So in the end a group of them just went and executed him. So by 1314 Robert the Bruce had succeeded in taking over virtually all the English strongholds in Scotland, with the exception of Stirling Castle, which was still held by the English. And so his brother Edward raised an army and they laid siege to Stirling Castle. Stirling Castle in the 14th century was of quite strategic importance, because I think Stirling was the lowest crossing point of the River Forth. But anyway, it was a major crossing point across the river, and so basically it was the gateway to the Northern Highlands. And so King Edward decided to raise a large army and travel to Scotland and try and relieve the castle. No one really knows exactly how big the armies were, but it's generally considered that King Edward's army numbered around 18,000 and King Robert's army was around 7,000. So then King Edward's army, they marched from Berwick towards Edinburgh, and then towards Falkirk, and then towards Stirling. Back in the 14th century, the Roman roads were still very important transport routes. This quiet country road I'm now walking along, this follows the exact route of the Roman road to Stirling. So in 1314, this was one of Scotland's most important roads. So on the 23rd of June 1314, 18,000 soldiers would have been marching along this route to Stirling Castle. This is a very rough diagram of the major landmarks on the day of the battle. So to the northwest is Stirling Castle, and that overlooks the Forth River, and that flows to the east of Stirling. Flowing into the river is a small river called the Bannockburn, and flowing into the Bannockburn there's a small stream called the Pelstream Burn. In between the two streams there's a large flat area of ground called the Carse, and I think a carse is an old Scottish word for a floodplain or just a low-lying area of ground. Leading towards the castle over the Bannockburn was the Roman road, and just to the east of the Roman road there was a minor track, and these both met at St Ninian's Church. And close to the Roman road there's a high area of ground called New Park, and this is the area which King Robert used as a base camp on the eve of the battle. Whilst I was walking to Stirling, I was watching loads of videos on YouTube about the Battle of Bannockburn, and I noticed that there was quite a few minor contradictions in each account of how the battle proceeded. And it is true that there is a lot of debate about how the battle actually proceeded, and people still debate about where the actual fighting took place. So it's only possible to give a very rough account of how the battle proceeded, because no one to this day really knows the exact events. I'm just on my way now to the Bannockburn River. This is the modern day Glasgow Road going into Stirling, and this is the Bannockburn River. I had a look at a modern day map and the map of the battlefield, and it looks like the old Roman road would have either followed this exact course over the river to Stirling, or it was very close to where I am now. But this area, this is where the fighting first broke out on the 23rd of June. And so on the afternoon of the 23rd, King Edward decided to send forward two large cavalry groups to do a reconnaissance of the area around Stirling. One of the cavalry groups went along the Roman road, while the second group travelled along the minor track. When the first group crossed over the Bannockburn, that's when they first encountered the Scottish army, and that's when a famous event in the battle took place. There was an English knight called Henry de Bohun, and he saw and recognised King Robert on a horse inspecting the soldiers, and so he thought, aha, if I can kill King Robert, that would win the battle there and then. And so he charged his horse towards King Robert and aimed his lance at him. Now, King Robert wasn't wearing any armour at the time, and the only weapon he had was a small axe, but he decided to take up the challenge and started to charge towards Henry de Bohun. And at the last second, he managed to dodge Henry de Bohun's lance, and as he rode past, he hit the knight in the head with his axe, and he killed him instantly. So then the English cavalry attacked the Scottish soldiers, And then the Scottish soldiers formed a formation known as a schiltron. And this is where the soldiers stand tightly packed together, and they're all armed with very long spears, about 12 foot long. And they held these out, so it's like a giant porcupine. And this makes it absolutely impossible for the cavalry to attack the soldiers. So eventually the English cavalry had to turn around and retreat. So while the fighting was going on along the Roman road, the second cavalry group had crossed the Bannockburn at the where the minor track was, and they headed towards St Ninians. But there were Scottish soldiers blocking the road there as well, and they formed schiltrons and they stopped the cavalry from going any further. So again, the English cavalry just had to turn round and retreat back to the other side of the Bannockburn. So following the failure of the cavalry to push back the Scottish army, King Edward decided to cross the Bannockburn towards the Carse, and he decided to make camp there for the night and then attack the Scottish on the following morning. I've just arrived down on the Carse. So of course it looks a lot different today than it did in the 14th century. It's over the years it's been built over. There's a railway line going over it and a busy A road. There's a housing estate on the western side, and there's lots of woods as well. But this is looking out over the battlefield. I'm just heading towards the Pelstream burn. So this would have been the northern end of the battle on the 24th of June. So this is the Pelstream burn. So this was the northern end of the battlefield on the 24th. Over in the west is Stirling, and over in the east is the Carse, and over in the south is the Bannockburn. So the Pelstream and the Bannockburn, they over in the east, they meet together, and it was between the two rivers that King Edward decided to make his camp on the evening of the 23rd. And that was a really stupid move. It shows he was a very bad military leader, because he didn't give himself any prospect of retreat, because the rivers would have prevented it. But he was so arrogant, he thought he would have just turned up and just taken Stirling Castle, so he didn't plan for a possible defeat. So early on the morning of the 24th of June, the Scottish army advanced forward, and they formed schiltrons right across the western side of the Carse, and they started to advance towards the English army. This was quite a new tactic, because normally schiltrons, they just stayed static in one place while they defended themselves against the cavalry. But King Robert had trained the army to actually move forward in that position and actually attack the cavalry. So this surprised the English. This was a tactic that had never been planned before. And King Edward, because he was a very poor military guy, he didn't know how to react. So there was the English cavalry started to charge, but they didn't succeed, and it wasn't a very well planned out attack. They were forced back, and the schiltrons kept moving forward. And the problem for the English army now is that they're now trapped between the schiltrons and the Pelstream burn on one side and the Bannockburn on the other, and they were getting hemmed in, and this was making it more and more difficult for them to fight. And so the Scottish army just gradually pushed them towards the Bannockburn. And this is where it turned into an absolute disaster for the English army, because they were trying to retreat over the river. So of course this was very difficult, thousands of people trying to cross over. So thousands of people were actually drowned or crushed trying to flee the Scots. And King Edward at this point knew that the battle had been lost, and so he had to flee the battlefield. And he eventually escaped to Dunbar Castle, where he managed to sail safely back to Berwick-upon-Tweed. So Bannockburn was a major victory for Scotland, and it eventually led to the signing of the Treaty of Edinburgh-Northampton in 1328. And in that, the English crown recognised that Scotland was an independent country, and that King Robert was the rightful King of Scotland, and his heirs would be the successors. And it was signed by King Robert for Scotland and King Edward III for England, and as he had succeeded King Edward II by that time. I've just arrived in the centre of Stirling, so I'm just going to go up to my hotel now, and then the plan is tomorrow morning I'd like to visit Stirling Castle, and then if I got time I'd like to visit the Bannockburn Information Centre at New Park, and then maybe see a bit of the older buildings around the town centre. So until tomorrow morning, good night. Friday the 15th of July, I've come over to New Park, and this was the Scottish Army's base camp before the Battle of Bannockburn. And this is the statue dedicated to Robert the Bruce. And this monument marks the spot where King Robert planted his standard on the eve of the battle. So one can see why he picked this site, because I'm looking south now towards where the Bannockburn is, and that's where the battle took place. So here he had a very good view of where the English army was coming from. I've just arrived back in the town centre, and I'm just going to visit Stirling Castle. You get a little map at the entrance which will help when I walk around the castle. This is the Great Hall, and this was completed in 1503, and it's where royal couples held court and banquets. This is looking over the Ochil Hills, and that's the direction I'm going tomorrow when I walk to Perth. And these cannons are the Grand Battery, and these were last used during the Jacobite uprisings in 1746. This is looking northwards now. This is looking westwards from the castle. Going to have a look at the palace apartments. the King's Inner Hall, and I think these paintings on the ceiling are the prominent people who lived in the area. This is the inner close, and just up there, that's the King's old building, and that was built in 1496 for James IV. And this is the Chapel Royal, and this was built in 1594 for the baptism of James VI's eldest son, Prince Henry. Just going to have a look in the Great Hall. There's a band playing in there at the moment. This is the Queen Anne Garden. Well, I think I've got enough footage now, so I'm going to upload this video tonight. Tomorrow I'm walking to Perth. I'm spending 3 days walking over the Ochil Hills, which should be quite picturesque. So thank you very much for watching my video, and I hope to upload my next one very soon. Bye!